Hi there. Good morning. Happy Thursday. It is lovely to see you today. Thank you so much for joining us for Daily Devotions through Redeeming Life Fellowship. And today we're going to continue through our journey through Acts. And believe it or not, we're actually almost getting pretty close to its climax, to when Paul finally arrives in Rome. And that's, Acts 28. That's where the story cuts off. And then we have to do our own digging for the rest of church history, but that's a whole nother matter. But today, we're going to be in Acts chapter 25. And one of the interesting things about this, if you'll remember, as I said before, that basically Acts 21 through 26 really do constitute one giant unit where Paul is constantly on trial, and he is constantly getting moved from one place to the other, and coming under this person's control and under this person's control, because there's people who want to assassinate him, and but nobody really actually knows how to how should we say this, to judge Paul, a Roman citizen, by Roman law that doesn't actually have any way to prosecute, any grounds for prosecution for Paul against Roman law. And because, unfortunately, or at least for the Jews, you can't substantiate the claims for capital punishment under Jewish law, that the Jewish leaders and the Sanhedrin, as angry as they are, and they're losing their minds over what Paul is doing, and that it's not grounds for capital punishment under Roman law, and but all the while, and here's one of the key things about this, is that you can see how whether it's Felix or Festus, that you can see them wavering and trying to play politics with Paul, and how, on the one hand, they want to basically just try him justly under Roman law, but they can't do so without appeasing the Jews. So it's like Paul becomes like this Mr. Hot Potato, who just kind of, it's kind of like, you deal with him. No, you deal with him. No, I'm not going to deal with him. You deal with him. And up to this point, he's been basically under some sort of version of house arrest, it seems, under Felix. And when Felix is succeeded by Festus, then they think, oh, maybe that hopefully he's been quiet long enough that the Jews will have forgotten about him, and say, oh no, the Jews haven't forgotten about him. So now this is now Festus's deal. And then when King Agrippa comes, and so Festus goes to Agrippa and says, oh, can you help me try and figure out what the charges should be against this Paul person. And all of this sounds as messy and convoluted as any kind of game of politics, when it's your job to be able to bring order and to do justice and to do the right thing, but you can't do that and still be a people pleaser, where none of them wants to be able to live up to their responsibility, even if that means making unpopular decisions. And so that you're watching these governors, it's like they can't win because they're trying to please everybody. And remember when Paul would say elsewhere, that if I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. The thing that you see in Paul throughout all of this, and mind you, chapter 25 is very interesting because you hear just a little bit of Paul's defense and his appeal to Caesar's court, and that's all that you hear about him. You don't hear any words of Jesus, you don't hear any words of Peter, you don't hear any words of Paul, you don't hear any words of anybody else within the church. All of this is just having to do with with watching these governors, how shall we say this, vacillate between trying to do justice and also to appease the people and to trying to assuage their anger through appeasement, and trying to just get by with their lives by being people pleasers. And that's a message that I need to hear, because by my temperament, I'm a people pleaser. And here in chapter 25, we're going to behold from these governors, namely this trial before Festus, about how difficult it is to live life as a people pleaser. So, Acts 25, and we're going to do the whole chapter, so you're going to have to bear with me, but I think you can handle it. You guys are smart. So, 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They had laid charges before the previous governor, Felix, and now that there's a new governor in town, they need to basically bring before Festus's attention the charges that were neglected on Felix's watch. So Festus is dealing with Paul, which is Felix's dirty laundry, that he just never took care of. He thought that if he just ignored it long enough, if he ignored Paul long enough, that eventually he'd be forgotten about it and the problem would just go away by itself. Wouldn't that be great? But no, now Festus is in charge, and the Jews say, maybe we'll actually get Festus to do something, unlike Felix. And so maybe this is their opportunity to be able to do Paul in. But it says, verse 3, they urgently requested Festus, as a favor to them, to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me and press charges against the man there, if he has done anything wrong. So that's a half measure. After spending 8 or 10 days with them, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul appeared, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Then Paul made his defense. I have done nothing wrong against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against Caesar. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges? And again, this is where Paul knows his rights and is not going to let somebody just walk over him or to try him unjustly in this case. And so he, in this case, is even when Festus wants to do a favor for the Jews, Paul holds him accountable and says, you're not going to be a people pleaser here, because that would be unjust. It says this, Paul answered, I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done any wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, You have appealed to Caesar you will go. A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. He said, There is a man here whom Felix left as prisoner. When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked that he be condemned. I told them that it is not the Roman custom to hand over any man before he has faced his accusers and has had an opportunity to defend himself against their charges. When they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes I had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus whom Paul claimed was alive. I was at a loss how to investigate such matters. This is pretty foreign after all. So I asked if he would be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there on these charges. When Paul made his appeal to be held over for the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, "I would like to hear this man myself." He replied, "Tomorrow you will hear him." And so if he's sending Paul to Caesar for trial, he has to issue what those charges actually are, and Festus doesn't know how to outline or articulate the nature of the charges that are being levied against him. Otherwise, Paul is just being sent as a prisoner just to say hi to Caesar because, well, what's the charges against him? You have to, you can't send a prisoner without charges. Otherwise, he shouldn't be a prisoner, but I digress. It says, the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking officers and leading men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, "King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man? The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not live any longer. I found he had done nothing deserving of death, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing definite to write to his majesty about him. Therefore, I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation, I may have something to write. For I think it unreasonable to send a prisoner without specifying the charges against him." And so, with this, when Paul is giving his defense before King Agrippa, you're going to find this is typical Paul, because like so many times before, even while the purpose of this moment is for, ostensibly, for Festus and Agrippa to be able to come to some kind of conclusion as to what the charges are against Paul, that Paul is going to use this as an opportunity to testify to the good news of the gospel even before high-ranking officials. And which is so characteristic of Paul as a person who would not miss an opportunity to use his time and opportunities well to fulfill the call that God had placed upon his life. So with that, I say thank you so much for taking the time to join us for Daily Devotions. If you haven't, subscribed to the YouTube channel, and I pray God would bless you and keep you, and I'm looking forward to the time we're all going to be able to gather together again in person. And with that, I'll see you next time.